Welcome to the Shrink Show.
Hi, friends.
Hi, friends. We have an amazing guest today. We have Angie Grandt, and she is going to share her really vulnerable but incredible story of experience in adopting kiddos who have behavioral issues, kiddos who are struggling, and her perspective as an adoptive mom, and honestly, how she turned her struggles into her now career in coaching other adoptive moms, how to parent these kiddos who have difficult behaviors, troubling behaviors, and really just challenge, this initial dream that I think most adoptive parents hope for and are excited for, but then when it gets met with such resistance and struggle. So listen to her beautiful story and check out all of her resources as well. And if either she can benefit you or someone you know, give it a share, because it's truly a one-of-a-kind service that I think anyone who's considering fostering or adopting could benefit.
Yeah, more people need it. So listen up and share it, please. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye. I think you reached out to me for talking about adoption.
Yeah.
But it probably was a while ago. So like, what do you like help with adoptive moms?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can ask me as many questions as you want while we're recording, but so I'm an adoptive mom, a bio mom, former foster mom. And when I was raising my son, he came to our family with a lot of past trauma and understandably some attachment difficulties. And I felt really prepared for that, but I wasn't. And so, as mom, I tried so hard to do everything for him and get him into all the therapies and every level of service I could possibly get my hands on. And I work in special ed. I worked in the autism field. I'm a speech therapist. So I know a lot about the field and how to help. And our relationship just kept getting harder and harder, to the point that he hasn't lived with me for the past couple of years. He's been hospitalized several times. And I didn't know, there just weren't resources for moms about what to do. The only resource that was suggested for me was therapy, maybe you need a therapist, but I didn't have past trauma that I needed to work through. I just wanted to know how to create a future with my son that matched why I became an adoptive mom in the first place. And so in the past couple of years, I jumped into coaching for other reasons and quickly realized that this was the missing piece when I was raising my son and things were so hard. I really needed a mindset coach who understood what I was going through to give me really practical tools. So once I realized that was the missing piece for me, I just jumped right in and became a certified coach. And now I really specialize in helping adoptive parents. So yeah, that was a long answer to your question.
No, that's awesome. I just was curious. Yeah.
I love that because it's one of the things especially when I worked as a school social worker, there were so many, people who had adopted kids from traumatic backgrounds, and it's hard because it's so easy to take it personally when they are struggling, like you're failing or you're not doing something or you're missing something. And it's rarely is that actually the case for a lot of those parents. And I think having somebody who's gone through it and is still experiencing it that can hold that space and say, you're doing a great job, but you can't love these kids into success, because they come with so much generational, just even from what we know in the womb, like the experience in the womb is huge. And that can have such a big influence. So they think, oh, I got this kiddo, when they were an infant. Okay, doesn't always that it doesn't always mean that you're going to be able to push them in the direction that you think they should go, but it does mean that you are the right person to help them right now in their life, however that looks for them, right? So I love that. I love that you do this.
Yeah, yeah, I do too. It's interesting. My day job, I work in an early intervention program, so birth to 3, we call it here in Wisconsin. So I work with children from the day they're born up until their 3rd birthday, kind of whenever they come to us during that age range. And I'm a speech therapist, so that's my specialty on paper. But really, like in my heart, my specialty is the kiddos who, not even kiddos who have experienced kind of the more like, I don't know, standard, that's an awful word, but like, what we would think of as trauma, but kids who've been in the NICU, oftentimes I see that they show signs of trauma or disrupted attachment, right? Like they don't get that skin to skin time the same way that science tells us that babies really need. And it's fascinating. And I feel so lucky that I have this space where I can help families. But yeah, I'm definitely jacked up about helping adoptive moms.
Yeah. So I guess what are you most passionate about, like kind of talking about or diving into that you feel like our audience could really benefit from? Because there's so many directions you can take this conversation.
Well, so this is really interesting for me to talk about kind of like out in public, but in 1999, I started working for an autism clinic. I'm so well trained in ABA. I think ABA, I use many of the principles in my relationship. I know it in and out. I've done it for more than half of my life. And I feel very strongly about it. But I realized within a month of having my son, so he was 5 when we adopted him. And at that point, he had just experienced so much. And like I said, I was like, I've got this. I've worked in ABA for, I don't know, at that point, like 12 years. And I can handle any kind of behavior. And I went through all the foster care training, which was pretty intense. So cognitively, I knew, okay, so the foster kids in our home, my son, they come with this baggage, they called it actually. And so on a cognitive level, I knew that. I knew what he was coming to us with. And I knew how I was supposed to respond. And then I had all of this ABA kind of like running through my blood. And I quickly realized that those strategies don't work with my son, with the other kids that were in our home through the foster care system. They just needed something so different. And so I learned about it in my foster care classes, but to put it into practice, not as easy as it seems when you have kids telling you, how much they hate you, or you're not my mom, or, how hard do I have to try for you to put me back in the system, or what's it going to take for you to send me back, right? And when you hear that as mom over and over again, right, I felt like I had tough skin for the most part. I felt like I was really well trained, but I feel so passionate about helping parents really put into practice and not just going through the motions of how to show up with unconditional love for your kids who've been through really, really tricky things. Not only how to do it, but how to change who you're being so that you believe yourself, because that's where I got really hung up, right? Like my son's therapist would say, just keep telling him how much you love him. Just keep telling him how much you love him. And I did, but I, over time, started to believe myself less and less and less. And I know that he knew I was doing all the right things, but my heart was less and less in it because I don't know, like I think as a foster mom and an adoptive mom, I think that we already have a bit of a wall up because we're human and we're afraid of that relationship being severed, broken, changed. So I think many of us go into it with a little bit of a wall up around our heart. And then, so we have this wall up and then we have this kiddo who's just doing the best that they can. But what it looks like to us as parents is so much pushback, so much so many behaviors. It's
Well,
hard.
they make it so hard for you to love them because,
Yeah.
I mean, their inner monologue is they're unlovable, right?
Yeah.
Because of all of the trauma that they've experienced, and even, and Jamie, having interacted more with people who've been adopted from a younger age. I mean, I know from a lot of the people I've interacted with who were adopted into another household, a lot of times there's that baggage of I'm unlovable because my biological family didn't choose to keep me. And, just how much of that is wrapped up in your biology is just insane, let alone then you throw the trauma in there.
Yeah.
And when it's your house, Angie, that's your safe place. And so it's so hard when you are having to try to love. It's like, I don't want to compare kids and dogs, but in a way I am, because so often people think, oh, I'm adopting a dog, and I'm just going to love them and love them and love them. If the dog is constantly attacking you again and again and again and again and again and again, at some point it's like, oh man, shit. How much do I also have to endure to love this dog?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not saying your child is a dog.
No, but you're right. I mean, it is like you go into any of those relationships with this like big heart, and I want to, give this dog a good home or give this boy a good home and love on him. And I went into that adoptive relationship like, I know I can give him a loving, caring home. I can love him so much and, love life with him and have so much fun. I knew that I was capable of all of that. And yeah, with each kind of attack, literally, figuratively, all of the above, it does really wear on you. And then to compound it, right? As an adoptive parent, I heard from far too many people, like, how hard does it have to get before you give him back? As if he were a puppy, right? But nobody would ever ask me that about my biological daughter, right? People look at it differently, which even those little questions is, I'm sure that people ask them to me in kindness, right? Like they care about me and don't want to see me be hurt. But those little questions, those little words can be really wearing on you. And then you put into it the guilt of like adopting, right? Like I made this promise to him. When I got pregnant with my daughter, I don't feel like I made a promise to her. I just, got pregnant. But for my son, I did, he was 5. I did make a promise to him, like, had conversations with him about, I'm going to love you and I'm going to give you a great home. And so I did make a promise to him. And so it's just so many layers of guilt and kind of like ongoing trauma, really. It's fascinating. And like I said, so your question before about what am I most passionate about? It's about helping moms not get stuck in that spinning wheel of like, you start with so much hope and you want to do such a beautiful thing and you try. And then it's like, oh my gosh, this is way too hard. I can't do this. I want to help moms before they get to that point of like, I need to throw in the towel. I can't do this anymore. I'm out of solutions. I want to help them before they get to that point. And, I started to say before about behaviors, right? Like, they're not likely to find the right behavioral solutions out there in behavior land because that isn't what they need. They need tools to keep their head in the game and tools to keep, like I help the moms that I work with bring back that vision that they started with about loving a child unconditionally and what that really means for them and what they want their family to look like. Because when you're in the muck of it, you lose total sight of that. And you're just stuck in like, oh my gosh, when's the next behavior going to happen? What am I going to do? Is everybody safe? Are all the doors locked? Like it gets to that level of panic and chaos. And you can't even remember why you adopted in the first place. So I really help moms to get back to that space so that we can work towards that that vision that they originally had, which is so much about your own mindset and not so much about behaviors. And when you're working on your mindset in that direction, it has a huge impact on behaviors, right? Because when we're treating our kids like, oh my gosh, when's the next thing going to happen? They respond accordingly.
100%. Yeah. I love that. It's also, I think the gift that you're probably giving as well is this realistic expectation that you can still love this child and create a healthy boundary by having this child receive treatment over here, or creating these, firm expectations or firm safety, boundaries, whatever it looks like. It doesn't mean that you failed at loving this child. It means that you are succeeding at loving this child. You're giving at least this child somewhere safe to return, should they choose to return home, should they choose to return to themselves, should they choose to, feel safe enough to be in that family environment. But so often they don't. And that's because of what they've experienced, not because of the efforts of those who've adopted them. Especially at like age 5, I worked with so many of those kids, and I spent so many hours on the phone with those parents, and they just feel so lonely. I love the gift that you're giving.
Yeah. Thank you.
Angie, is your son 5 now, or he was 5 when you adopted him?
He was 5 when we adopted him. He's 17 now and about to graduate from high school.
So then what were like some of so I'm an adoptee, and I know in like the 80s, they definitely didn't do parenting classes or expectations for how to raise any child. It was definitely love them and God will show you how to fulfill your family. Like it was very Christian and saving children. And if you just love them hard enough, they will love you, because attachment theory wasn't something that was widely talked about. So what was your training and experience? Because it sounds like it was a foster to adopt situation. But I know, like, I've previously been in adoption agencies where they do different like educational classes. I think that's definitely changed in the past like 20 years. But what was your education like for what to expect for the fostering and adoption process?
Well, so my son was not a foster to adopt. His story was unique. I think everybody's story is so unique. I've yet to meet two adoptive parents that have the same story. But I was married at the time, and we were licensed foster parents, and so had a few kiddos in and out of our home during that time while we were licensed foster parents. And during our last placement as foster parents, my son's biological mom made the decision that she couldn't parent him anymore. She was dealing with a lot of mental health and addiction related issues, which she had dealt with or was dealing with for long before she conceived him. And she kept him. She had planned on placing him for adoption, had chosen a family and everything before he was born, and then changed her mind at the last minute and kept him for those 5 years. And those 5 years were really hard for both of them. And so then he was 5 and was displaying a lot of behaviors that you would expect from a kid who, had experienced what he had experienced in those first couple of years. And she said she couldn't handle that anymore. So she went back to the same agency that she had originally planned on placing him with. And they didn't have any families that were licensed to take kids over the age of 2. It was an agency for babies. And so I had a friend who happened to work there, and so called and said, like, hey, I know you're a foster mom. Would you consider, a son forever? So I said, it wasn't really the plan, but I'd love to meet him and see how this works. But you can't just like meet a child and be like, oh, just kidding, not that one. That's not how that works, right? At least not if you have a bleeding heart like I do. So we met him and he joined our family. I mean, like I want to say we like met him on a Saturday and he started coming to our house on Monday or something. Like it was like such a quick turnaround, and his mom terminated rights pretty quickly after that. And then just maybe 2 months after he was in our home, she cut off all contact with him and said she just couldn't handle it anymore. So he hasn't had any contact with her since then, since he was 5. So as far as training goes, in the county that we live in, the training for foster parents was pretty hefty. I think it was like 16 weeks of training, and all about trauma and understanding trauma, understanding where these kids come from. Some of the work was learning how to work with bio family and the dynamics of all of that. So it was it was intense, but also this kind of like high level cognitive, like, here are the things that you do, but I definitely wasn't prepared for how to actually do it. I don't know, for some reason it was so much easier working with kids with autism who, well, one, they weren't my kids, they weren't in my home, but they can also display really challenging behaviors. And for some reason it was just so much easier to like, okay, but that's my job and that's what I do and this is how I handle it. But then to have kids in your home, it was so much harder than I anticipated, I guess.
Right.
Do you have, like, do you feel comfortable? I'd be curious to hear some of the stories or some of your experiences and, what kind of, I know you said obviously the adoption of your son led you down this path, but that didn't happen overnight either. You had to walk through fire to get to that point, to be like, I don't have anybody, so I want to be that person for people. Like, do you feel comfortable kind of talking a little bit more like vulnerably and in depth about that? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am.
You're not putting me on the spot. I just want to be careful because it's, part of it is my story as mom, but part of it is my son's story. And so I don't ever want him, like I said, our relationship is still really hard right now. And, I check in with him pretty regularly and say hi to him, but I don't get much, he's not mean to me anymore. So that's good. But it's very just like, I don't know, cordial at this point, which is weird. But I'm hopeful that will improve once he kind of moves on to the next stage of his life. But I mean, as far as things that we experienced, so right out of the gate, I mean, he had been here for less than a month and we noticed like hoarding of food, like food and snacks and wrappers everywhere throughout the house. Just, squirreled away in the strangest, in pillowcases, under the mattress, behind the dresser, like within a month's time. And I'm like, I don't even know how he has that much time on his hands or unsupervised time. But it quickly made us realize that he wasn't sleeping at night, which also probably not super surprising, right? So he, that part of his brain was just wired for safety and survival. And so he wasn't sleeping at night. He, was rummaging through the house in the middle of the night, which pretty quickly, it was just food, right? But that very quickly made me realize, like, oh, wow, in the middle of the night, I don't know him yet. I don't know him at all. And he's doing these things that are very survival based, which triggered in me fear. He was only 5, but at 5 years old, well, pretty shortly after that, we had already had some incidents, which made it really clear that at 5, 6 years old, he was already stronger than me. And when he was working from that part of his brain that was more of a fear response, he was very much stronger than me and could overpower me when he was so young, which is terrifying as mom, right? So we pretty quickly realized that, there were food related concerns at meal times. He would gorge and gorge and gorge and had the sweetest little puppy dog eyes, but would, like, I'm still hungry. I don't remember ever getting big meals like this, so we're like, oh my gosh, of course you can have more food. And at this, like, the first helping was more than I eat. And so then we give him a second helping. And then sure enough, it'd all come back out in the middle of the night, and then the next night we'd go through it all over again. And Yeah, so things, I mean, right from him being with us for about a month or two, just quickly.
It's interesting because that hoarding is so common,
Mhm.
so insanely common. Anybody who has worked as a foster parent or adopted any young kids with trauma, it's just it's a common thread. There's that hoarding, and it's obvious, like you said, it's that survival brain. It's that need to, food has this way of releasing the serotonin, which is also the love hormone, and so it's that feel good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to get my next meal, but it also feels really good to eat all of this food, and it's that sense of control
Yeah.
because I get to choose when and how and what I eat, which are all three things that you need in a trauma, like in a young trauma brain.
Yeah. 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 So, I mean, like we experienced things like that early on, urination in lots of unusual places really early on.
Yep.
And like each new things that, again, like at that point I had worked in the autism field. By the time my son was in our family, I want to say I was like 13 years in or 12 years in. So I'd experienced all kinds of kids with all kinds of interesting things going on. And each kind of new thing that my son did, I was like, oh gosh, I've not experienced that before. I've never even heard of a parent talking about that before. This is interesting. And so part of me was curious and interested. Part of me was like, oh my gosh, like this is scary as a mom. And so things spiraled. We had probably at 7 was his first suicide attempt, which was also really scary. He also became quickly aggressive. And I really started to notice very different responses from him. So like I was most often getting the fight response from him or the flee response. And so we were noticing times where he was like sneaking off or running away. I mean, he ran away for the first time, I think he was 7, and he hopped on his bike. He got mad about something, hopped on his bike. We live out in the country, and he drove or rode towards his dad's house. His dad is about 10 miles away, and he made it probably 2/3 of the way there on a highway at 7 years old on a tiny little bike, just up and down like a state highway. I can't, like, when I found out where my hope was he just took off in our kind of country neighborhood and he was out hiding behind a bush somewhere. I was like, there's no way he went to his dad's, no way. And when I found out that he did, I was just so scared for him because I can just imagine his poor brain, like he's just so scared and he's just running and running and running. It's like semis. This is like a main track for semis on this narrow highway. And like I said, it's those little things these things that happened that each time I was a little bit more scared for myself, for our daughter, for him, for all of the above.
What's
when
the
these
age
things
difference?
happened,
Sorry.
Oh yeah. What's the age difference?
I'm sorry, what was that, Jamie?
What's the age difference between him and your daughter?
4 years. So she is about 4 years older than him.
I have 2 questions. So what was he like in school? And who did you reach out to when all of these behaviors were happening?
So that was the other thing I was going to say. So I did not understand or know what this was then, but just in the past year, I've heard quite a bit about it and I've been learning more about it. But so at home, he, I've heard this from so many of his therapists and have read it elsewhere, but right, I'm the mom in the situation. And he was raised by his mom and for so many reasons, probably has such mixed feelings about her. And I get it, but I definitely took the brunt of his anger. So with me, he tended, like we had our moments and I tried so hard, like moments of like one-on-one time, going out for ice cream or, trying to play games or just chatting with him. I often would like pick him up alone. I made sure that when we got divorced, that we had, like, I had one weekend with my son, one weekend with my daughter, and then one weekend with both kids. so that he had one-on-one time. And also my daughter had one-on-one time because so much of my energy went to him. But at school, he was so interesting because there were certain people, and I never understood why, but there were certain people that would describe him as such a joy, so pleasant, one of the best well-behaved kids in their class, no issues ever. And I kept thinking, like, you must be so naive, and he must be just like right under your nose, doing the stealing and the sneaking and the lying and all of that. But in the past year, I've really learned, I think that it was so much of a fawning behavior that he was doing with them, which then it drove me crazy because people, I would get the like, well, I don't know what the issue is at home. He's perfectly fine with me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you don't live with this kid. But
was he diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder? Yeah. I mean, that's such a reactive attachment because if you aren't familiar with the trauma response and, you want to assume the best. I had so many students who they knew they were genius. I mean, they really knew exactly how to play you to get what they wanted. And it was only when you would truly watch their behavior and how they interacted with different folks that you would recognize, the manipulation. And I hate the word manipulation because we all manipulate to get, it's about getting your needs met, right? But it's fascinating. So it doesn't surprise me that you'd have those bleeding heart teachers who want to assume the best and would be like so polite and well-behaved because he knew how to play the game. Yeah. He knew how to survive. That's what he was doing, was surviving and getting his needs met. And if all I have to do is give you a compliment and charm me a little bit and you give me that extra bag of chips every single day, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And I guarantee you that's what he was getting out of them, was like food and things.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Definitely. And also, like you said with mom, you're the mom, right? And home is the safe place. So he needs somewhere to unload. He needs somewhere to release and someone to release on. And that tends to be the safest person. Sorry, I can hear screaming in my household. But it tends to be the safest, right? So when you think about, like, if I've had a hard day at work, I can't unload on my colleagues or my students, right? So then I come home, who am I more likely to snap at? My husband, because he's the safest person that is going to love me regardless, hopefully.
Yeah.
So then who would you reach out to when he was displaying these behaviors? Or you're hearing stories from teachers and you're like, this isn't fair. Like, I feel like just as moms, Angie, would be like, this is crap. Our husbands can do nothing.
That's an interesting question. So when I was married, my husband didn't get it, and oftentimes would say that our son didn't really have reactive attachment, didn't really, he was just being a bad kid. Those are the kinds of things that he would say when we were married. And so that ended. That response didn't change after divorce. Who knew, right? But obviously he was not a person that I tended to reach out to. Of course, I tried to keep him in the loop about things that were happening. But as far as like support for myself, I did meet a great guy. I've been with him now for over 9 years. So he was there through the thickest of the thick. And he has such a personal, deep understanding for what my son went through and why he acts the way he does. And which I couldn't have known that when I met this guy, but it, each time I would learn something, I'd like attend another training or seminar, I'd read a book. And so then I'd come home and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I learned this about trauma, or I learned this about attachment. And he was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So he was kind of reflecting on maybe things that he had experienced or the way that he looked at the world, which which then just helped me so much to just make more sense of it about that. I don't know, like it was so easy to be so hyper focused on the behaviors that were right in front of me, even though I knew where they came from, right? Like I knew that they came from trauma. I knew that they came from the disrupted attachment, but in the moment, while the thing is happening in your house, it's so easy to just get so hyper focused on whatever it is that's happening. And so I think, I don't think he realized it at the time, but I think he was just so grounding for me. My guy was just so grounding for me to help me shift my perspective a little bit about what was happening. So he was probably my primary source. I can say that, I have some really close friends and I love them to death, but talking to them about my son's behaviors was never really all that helpful because they didn't get it. They weren't living in my home experiencing what my heart was experiencing. They tried and they care, but really, my guy for sure was the primary person. And then I would definitely reach out to my son's therapist, or when he was in a day treatment program, reach out to his primary caseworker just to vent about what had happened or to ask for advice about how I responded. But so those were nice for the venting part of it. But as far as solutions about what to do in my home, that's where I just felt so stuck and kind of at a loss, other than to just, like I said, my son's therapist, the primary strategy of like, just keep telling him how much you love him. Just keep telling him how much you love him. Well, okay, I can do that, but I don't believe me. So I don't think my son believes me.
Right. But even small things, like, he's getting up in the middle of the night and stealing food, and like if he had threatened to kill you or your daughter, because these are things obviously that I've seen, just that decision of locking your door, that's a hard decision to make as a parent, because you don't want to have to lock your door against a 5-year-old, right? But then you also are like, well, my daughter's out there, so what do I lock her door too? And then what does that convey to the 5-year-old? And that's just a simple, like, Maslow's basic safety question. And there's so many more layers to that how do you, right? And I think you're right when you say those solutions, they're not always pretty. They don't always look good. And you also don't want to be that parent that's like, what the fuck, teacher? Like, he's manipulating you, grow the fuck up. But you also need to in some ways, because you're like, ugh, he's manipulating you. But then you get demonized because well, he's a child. He's innocent. There's so much that, like, I can feel it. And having worked at a behavioral school with a lot of those kids, it's hard. That's hard.
Yeah, I ended up taking that, right, because I teachers and principals and my gosh, like phone calls, that became one of my triggers, right? Like I'd be at work and everything's, I'm trying to do my job, and then the phone would ring and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the school. Like I would go from like productive to like heart racing, like having that response pretty quickly, which was so, it's so hard to like keep being an adult, keep doing your job, keep your cool at work. When school, for a while there, it was every day, emails or phone calls every day from the school. But I ended up, I shared with the principal my concerns on an ongoing basis. I rarely would say to the individual teachers, whatever they were throwing at me, I would just, let it fly and keep doing me. But I ended up, I don't remember exactly how far in it was. He was in school for a couple of years. We're in a really tiny town. And I ended up asking if I could train the staff. And so they let me come in and do a trauma training for the staff, which was so incredibly hard. I do autism trainings all the time and I could do it in my sleep, but to go in front of the school staff and train them in a kind of a general sense about trauma and attachment and why it happens, what it looks like, how how parents would love to see their school staff respond. It was the most emotional training I've ever given because it's so personal and so close to home. And I knew that many of the people in that room were people who have not done it right, in my opinion. So that was my solution to that. I'm not a very reactive person in that, like, if somebody says something to me that I disagree with, I tend to keep it in, take note of it, figure out how I want to respond later. But that ended up being my response, was training them, which had a huge impact. But it definitely, and that was prompted by, there was talk of this. I kind of caught wind that some of the school board members were talking about expelling my son, and he was probably in like second grade at the time. And I wasn't okay with that. He's just a kid who deserves an education and deserves a shot. He has already had a way harder life than probably most of the people on the school board. And so that really prompted me to go present in front of the school to help them understand. And then I also went to the school board and pled his case for him to help them understand that, he's not targeting your son or your daughter. He's a kid who's hurt and has a lot to work through and might need more supervision, but also needs more compassion and understanding than the average bear does. So, of course, I didn't win everybody over, but more people than before had greater understanding and more compassion.
What a gift, though, just for you to do that trauma training. There's so many things that I'm like, oh my God, do you then provide this training for foster families and for, other families who are like going to be adopting? Because you can talk about it in such a raw way, even just the hoarding behavior, the urination. I mean, again, a lot of those I've seen that same behavior with so many kids in that same predicament, yet that's probably not something that you got trained on or it was a discussion when you were doing this. So what a beautiful gift you can provide those families, because even as somebody who, as a therapist and a school social worker, I would hold that space for families, but I was one of maybe one that did, to say, hey, you're still doing a great job. Like this, that's not a reflection of you. And this is common. And they'd be like, it is? Oh my God, why has nobody told you this?
Yeah. I actually, probably, over a year ago now, I ended up starting a Facebook group where I do trainings in there every week that I do trainings. I'm of course always so cautious about what I say because I don't ever want my son to, be mad that I'm sharing his story. I really want it to come from a place of helping parents, but we're not separate, right? Like my relationship with my son involved him. So, but yeah, I do trainings every week, and I've been reaching out more recently to adoption agencies and foster agencies to offer trainings as well. So that is something that I've been working on too, because I agree. Hearing it from somebody who isn't just a professional who read about it in a book or something, I think it matters.
I agree very much, because it at least twofold. It gives people a realistic expectation going in, and it prepares them. My grandma always says, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. I mean, this is why we do tornado drills and fire drills, right? I'm not hoping a tornado takes my house down or a fire burns everything to the ground, but I have a plan in case that happens, and I'm prepared. So that's really a huge benefit to your relationship with your son. He really taught you a lot that can help others be a little bit more prepared, because reactive attachment I personally think, is one of the most difficult mental illnesses within a childhood, because we're so relationship oriented, especially if you're adopting, if you're fostering, it's because you love people and you want them to succeed. And reactive attachment takes your love and balls it up and throws it. And it's like, okay, yeah, now what? Give me a bag of chips, I'm not saying that that's the only thing. There's so much beauty within. I mean, some of my favorite kids have reactive attachment, but they're tough cookies.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I know I did hear that time and time again from each kind of professional that I met along my son's path, from the second therapist. The first one was not a great match, but pretty much from every professional along that path was, they would say reactive attachment is the hardest disorder. I also worked at a behavioral health clinic at the time that I adopted and was going through all of this. And so had several colleagues who, I just shared little bits and pieces of my story, and I knew before adopting that many of the therapists were uncomfortable working with kids with reactive attachment. It was eating disorders and reactive attachment. Those were kind of, and autism. Some weren't super comfortable with autism, but then they're like, anything else is fair game. And I'm like, anything else? Like, it's that hard? But it is. It's that hard.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's. I always kind of say, and like with my mom having schizophrenia and bipolar, like she's an unreliable narrator because her perception is so different from others' perceptions. She's hearing voices and, like thinks things that aren't actually based in reality. Reactive attachment is kind of that same with like emotions, right? That emotional intelligence, that emotional connection. When you think you're moving in one direction and, oh, yay, everything's great. And then it's like something else happened. You're like, what the hell? I don't understand. It's hard to follow the rules to that game because it's an unreliable narration of emotion. It's an unreliable connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes people would ask me as mom, like, oh, what do you think triggered it this time? And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, your guess is as good as mine, is as good as if I asked the neighbor, right? Like, you're so right that it was so very unpredictable. There were for sure some things that I was like, this is probably going to make it tricky. Like I knew that transition time on Sundays was tricky. That was a guarantee. Mm-hmm. And got worse and worse and worse. It used to be like 2 hours before transition. And then it was like 3 or 4. And then it was like the morning, even though transition didn't happen till 7, like just wake up and we're just in a mood and it's going to be a chaotic, scary day. So some things were really predictable. And it's hard to, but then so many other things were unpredictable at first, but became more predictable. Like, going to the grocery store became a huge deal. And I get it because of the food thing, right? But, there's no eating at the grocery store. And, I let him pick and it was usually just him and I. So it was always just the two of us. And man, like police involvement at the grocery store of all places, right? And just it was just wild. But that became predictable to the point that like I would try to preface on the way there, like we're on our way to the grocery store, what do you need to feel safe when we get there? But even that just made it worse, right? Then right away it's like, I don't even feel safe right now. We're not going in. And I'm like, but we have to get groceries. I'm not safe. And I'm like, oh dear, here we go. So yeah.
I think there'd be such a huge need for you to get in with a lot of those parents. Like even just the school that I used to work at, I'm like, well, shit, they could have you come talk to all their parents. Like there's so many of those parents that could really, really benefit from just hearing, your story, because it's not the professional. It's real life experience saying, this is one way to handle it, but that's not the only way. Yeah. Let's all learn from each other, because it's really kind of a guessing game, just like being an actual, going through trauma yourself, it's unpredictable. Like sometimes my own behavior is unpredictable.
So then, Angie, what do clients, what do they typically reach out to you for? Are they already adopting or fostering, or are they planning on it? At what point do they try to reach out to you?
Honestly, most of the time when parents reach out to me, they're already at the end of their rope, kind of like I was, because that's the story that I tell, right? Like I was at the end of my rope. I was considering, like, what if I can't keep him? What if, you know, what if this being his mom isn't going to work out? And so that is a story that I tend to share. So most often when parents find me, that's where they're at too, where they've worked with their county caseworker, they've been through trainings, their child is in therapy, and things just keep getting worse and worse. I am in the process of reaching out to agencies to hopefully catch parents before they get to that point, because I know how traumatizing that is to parent and child when you get to that point, because it's not like we just got there overnight, right? Behaviors were really hard in our home right away. And I was having emotional responses pretty early on. Like I had described, like some of the things that were happening where I was like, oh gosh, am I safe here? So I was having those feelings pretty much within the first couple of months. And I know how unhealthy that was for our relationship. I know how hard it was for me. I was I was trying so hard and being so intentional about spending really quality time with him. But I also know that at an emotional level, I know that he probably was way more aware of how I was feeling than I was because I think that's how his trauma brain is designed, is to be just so hyper aware of what everybody else is thinking and feeling in the room. and I'm mom. And so I am reaching out to agencies to try and connect with families before it gets to that point, because I know it's not good for anybody. But honestly, I think, coaching is not something that I knew coach was for sports, but never had considered or knew that it was an option for me as a mom. And so I'm really working on educating people about how coaching can really change the trajectory of relationships, even if you start later. I mean, there's one mom that I'm working with that she was ready to throw in the towel with her adopted kiddos and just was at a loss, and had hired a different kind of coach. She had gone through all the therapies and was working with her caseworkers and hired another kind of like parent coach, but they weren't a mindset coach and they weren't a post-adoptive parent themselves. And so I just think it wasn't a good match for her. But she has seen crazy, crazy changes in her relationship with her child, where when I met her, she was just, as I would have her like, oh, describe to me something that happened over the past week that you want some coaching on. And just the tone of her voice was frustrated and angry and irritated. And the words weren't very kind. And they were very like, how do I say this in a nice way? But they were like blaming her child, right? Because that's where she was at as mom. And that's where I was at as mom. But now when she describes, 6 months in, and she describes an incident with her child, hey, how's the week been going? And she's like, that's been a pretty good week. And I'm like, oh, so nothing came up with your child? And she's like, oh my gosh, yeah, all kinds of things came up. But the way she describes it is so qualitatively different. And she's like, we, she had a big meltdown, or this or that happened, and here's how I showed up differently, and here's how quickly she calmed, or here's how she was able to talk to me about it afterwards, where 6 months ago that was not their relationship. And so behaviors have for sure decreased because of how mom is showing up, but mom just feels so different about her relationship, which is, to me, the only way for them to have a positive relationship is for mom to go first, and mom to really work on how she's feeling. Because if mom is irritated and annoyed and frustrated and ready to throw in her towel, well, then it puts it all on the child to fix the relationship, which that can't be the solution. So yeah, that's kind of where I meet parents at most often, is when they're at that kind of really gross point, honestly.
What kind of advice would you have for the the serving professionals, helping professionals, and therapists that, I mean, obviously you can't give them all the knowledge right now in a 2-minute spiel, but like the biggest thing, so that they can maybe show up a little bit better. Because I love it, that parent has you, but I'm thinking about all of the parents experiencing that. If they don't find the Angie Grants in their area, what do they do? Like the professionals need to really get a better handle on this so that they can save that space too. So I guess what kind of advice would you have?
Well, I mean, they definitely can connect with me. I'm a virtual coach, so
no, and I didn't mean that, but I mean you're one person, and there's so many. I'm not trying to take business from you.
No, I was kidding. So as far as like how I would love, just reflecting on my own experiences, I had some very well-meaning and highly qualified and working in behavioral health. I feel like I had easier access to a great trauma-focused therapist for my son, right? Like I wasn't just some Joe Schmo calling off the street. I connected with my colleagues and said, who's the best in the area? And there, several of them were like, you have to get him in to see so-and-so. So then I called the clinic and they're like, he doesn't take patients. And I'm like, well, I was referred by this and this and this person. They're like, oh, okay, we can get you on the schedule, right? Like I had great access to people who had been in the field for decades, really focusing on trauma. I feel so fortunate for that. But even then, I don't know if he knew exactly how to help me. He was very calm and would listen, but his, the way insurance works, his job was to help my son through my son's trauma. And so he would like give me little tidbits of things that I could do, but the focus really couldn't be on me. How do you write a case note and bill insurance for, providing therapy for somebody who's not your patient? But I guess the one thing that, I don't know if there is one thing, but that it's such a small but huge difference is he was great at telling me what to do. But I didn't know how to do it in a meaningful, impactful way for my son. So back to the, like he's saying, just tell him how much you love him. Just tell him how much you love him. Well, this sounds so silly to say, but I had no idea that I had power over my own thoughts and feelings. I felt like I'm raising this challenging son. I'm supposed to feel frustrated. So I'm saying these words, I still love you, buddy. I love you. I'm going to love you forever. You're never leaving my family. Those are the words I was saying. But in my heart and in my mind, I was thinking like, gosh, is he really going to stay here forever? Can I keep doing this forever? I feel really scared. So those are like feelings and thoughts that I had going on inside of me. And I didn't know until I started working with a mindset coach. I didn't know how much power I had over my own thoughts and feelings about that. And I think that I could have shown up in such a different way for him had I known that. I think I wouldn't be so fired up about helping other moms had I not been through all of that. So we'll work on our relationship and that will get better. So I'm glad that I've been through what I've been through because I know that it put me in a place to help other moms. But that's the one piece that I don't think my therapist really fully, or my son's therapist really fully knew that or knew how to articulate that to me. But if I had done work then to work on my thoughts and feelings so that I really believed that I really love you, buddy, you're going to stay here forever. If I had those tools in my tool belt, I would have just shown up differently for him. So help your patients do that. Help them understand they have control over their thoughts and their feelings because it will change the way that they show up. It will change the words that come out of their mouth. You think about like, you get into an argument with your spouse and you can say to them, I still love you. I really still love you. Or you can be like, I still love you. Like they mean very different things. And so I thought I was trying to tell my son that I still love him, but I didn't believe it. And so anyways, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It's like that, the thought behavior triangle. What is that? And then CBT, right? Your thoughts influence your emotions, which influences your behavior, which then influences your thoughts. And it's this whole thing. And it really does start with a thought.
Yeah.
It truly does. Because if I think I'm fat and ugly and tell myself that every single day, I'm gonna hide, I'm gonna behave that way, I'm gonna shrink, I'm gonna eat, I'm gonna create that reality. So it's huge. I am so excited for your journey, and I know it's been hard. As somebody who's gone through hard things and uses that to try to benefit others, I love that you've also gone through hard things and are using that to benefit others. And of course, Angie, Angelina, Angela means messenger of God. So it's like you're spreading this message of love and mindset and a new way of thinking to other families so that they don't have to experience that. And I think that's such a gift. So if somebody is listening and they have a family that they're like, oh God, because I already had 1,000 families in my brain that I could refer to you, or they themselves want to reach out to you. How does somebody reach you?
So I try to keep it easy. My company name is Connected Parents with Angie, and I spell it different than you do, Angie.
Yeah, most people do.
So it's connectedparentswithangie.com is my website, but that's also, you can find me. I have a private Facebook group where, like I said, I do weekly trainings in there. Same thing. It's Connected Parents with Angie. I'm also on Instagram as Connected Parents with Angie. So that's the easiest way to find me. And I do offer a free session because I know coaching is different, right? Like most people haven't experienced a coach other than through sports. So I do offer a free session. You can book that by going to any of those places. I have my link everywhere. I try to make it easy to find. So yeah, just check it out. And if you feel like it's a good fit for your family or you're really just stuck, I'd love to help. That's where you find me.
Yeah, no, I love this. I love this as a wonderful resource. I'm certainly going to push this to a lot of people because I think it would be super helpful. And thank you for sharing your story and for your vulnerability. I also really appreciate your thoughtfulness when it comes to wanting to be cautious in what you share of your son's story, because I think that that's really important to recognize too, that it is his story as well. So I think that's huge. So listeners, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The more you share, the more Angie's, service gets out there, the more people this helps. So we really are thankful for you and rely on, word of mouth, which that's what this is. So, Angie, don't leave yet, but, Jamie, do you have any last thoughts or anything you want to say? No? Okay. So thank you so much, listeners. We appreciate you and have a wonderful day. Bye.
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 If you think we're cool,
or even if you don't,
please like or subscribe so you'll stay up to date on all things The Shrink Show.
Thank you for choosing to spend a portion of your life with us. And remember, don't take yourself too seriously. Life is all a giant shrink show.
A Huda Media Production.
Side effects of listening to this podcast may include side aches or snorting from laughter, impromptu jazz hands, nodding in agreement even though you might be listening alone, an occasional "you said it, girl," and mild cases of existential dread. This podcast is strictly for entertainment and informative purposes only and is not intended or implied to diagnose, treat, or otherwise substitute for professional mental health, medical, legal, or other advice. Thank you. Unicorn says bye.